I'm going to invite our next panel up to the stage. So we can kind of now flip from the federal level down to the local level. So I'm going to move from my left to right here in announcing kind of who's, as they're coming up, and they're going to get mic'd, right? So we have first Keisha Powell, who's the Commissioner of the Department of Watershed Management, all the way up from the city of Atlanta, Georgia. Keisha runs a department that serves over 1.2 million people per day. So I don't know about you, that sounds like a tremendous amount of people. That's a lot of responsibility, Keisha. She also has deep experience in local government, working from everywhere from Jackson, Mississippi, to right up here in the greater kind of DC, Baltimore area, working in Baltimore City too. Responsible for a huge multi-billion-dollar capital campaign as well. To Keisha's left is Andy Krisoon, who's Executive Director and Chief Engineer for the Camden County Municipal Utilities Authority. So Andy and his team serve over 500,000 customers in southern New Jersey. And Andy's also more than just a business manager. Similar to Keisha, too, they're both licensed engineers, right? So they bring that expertise. And I want to stress, after we just heard about agreement in Washington happening too, Andy is an award winner in professional ethics. So you know everything you're going to hear from today is honest and straightforward. And then to his left is Katie Spiker, who's a senior federal policy analyst at the National Skills Coalition. Katie is a true expert in federal workforce issues. She's been incredibly helpful during our project, was here for our roundtable. So we are so fortunate to have her here. I promised her I was going to do this. She does have a JD from Georgetown University, but I'm a Florida Gator and she's a Miami Hurricane. So we'll see how we handle things here today.
Into it during the panel, yeah.
All right. So let's jump right in, right? So Joe, thank you so much for helping to set the table for us. As usual, when you come to Brookings, you're going to get more stats than you can handle. Hopefully it helps set the table for what's going on in a whole sector. And so I think we learned a lot about how much work is out there, right? Really, there's a lot of people employed here. There's a lot of opportunities. What I want to start off with, obviously, I want you all to introduce yourselves here to the crowd. I kind of handle the details. But what I want to kind of start off with this, especially with Keisha, you, and Andy, starting on the utility side, is from the workforce perspective. I mean, you are managing real customers, real amounts of people. What keeps you up at night from a workforce perspective?
Ooh.
No softballs here.
That wasn't on the prepared list of questions. I think what keeps me up at night as far as the workforce is concerned is being able to have the workforce we need to maintain the infrastructure investments that we're making, right? You mentioned our capital improvement program is $1.2 billion over 5 years, and we're probably about halfway through that segment, but we identified a need of over $8 billion of infrastructure investment. And if you've been paying attention to Atlanta news, we've had some pretty significant water emergencies over the last couple of weeks. And so having a team that can manage the infrastructure in those water emergencies, but just day to day, is really vital. We've reached 130 water main breaks in 1 month for the month of January, and we're facing a 55% retirement eligibility rate. It's difficult to recruit young talent, as Joe said in his report. We joke in my department that we have the millennial movement going on. It's difficult it has been difficult to connect with what that generation wants to do and contribute because they learn differently, as has every generation. I think someone mentioned that. But that retirement eligibility, and we're seeing the retirement, we have a high attrition rate, we have a very high vacancy rate because it's been difficult to recruit. And so what we just recently did was a competitive pay study, because pay is one element of it, but it's not the only element. And so we started with doing a competitive pay study for our 10 hot jobs. Many of those jobs are on the list that Joe spoke to, so that we could get our folks to a competitive pay. We were severely under market in some of our critical positions, boots on the ground positions, but we've got other issues that we have to overcome. The licensure barrier, the barrier of folks that don't have a high school education or even a GED. So those things kind of keep me up at night because we have to have the workforce moving forward. And I can touch on, as we talk, some of the other things that we're doing to prepare for the future.
That's great. Yeah, we can't wait to hear innovations. Let's get this tough stuff out of the way, if you will. So, Andy, same question to you. What's keeping you up at night?
Thanks. That's a great answer from Keisha. I guess there are three things that are keeping me up at night. The first is that we have over 50% of our workers are eligible for retirement within the next 5 years. So I'm concerned very much about our ability to sustain our work. That's the first thing. The second thing is that the city that I work in, Camden, New Jersey, is one of the most economically distressed communities in the entire country, and we have an unemployment rate of 10.4%. So it bothers me when I look, our wastewater treatment plant is 100 yards away from a residential neighborhood, and I see the people that live there need jobs. We need replacement workers, and I can't hire them because they don't have the training that they need. So the three things that bother me are lack of replacement workers, the fact that our citizens need jobs, and that our citizens have lacked the training to become the replacement workers to fill our positions.
Yeah, I gotcha. Well, that's a great transition from both of you to Katie, right? I mean, you kind of see it from the other side of the aisle, right? You're trying to make sure that we can feed in people with the right kind of skills, right? How much does what we've heard, both certainly from Keisha and Andy, but also from Joe's work and even from the workshop when you're here, right? How much does what's happening in the water industry connect to how you all see things from the workforce side?
It completely aligns with what we're seeing in the workforce system more broadly and with infrastructure industries. National Skills Coalition focuses, we're a DC-based advocacy organization. We focus on middle skill jobs, so jobs that require more than a high school diploma but less than a 4-year degree, which is where so many of these water jobs fit staunchly in. And across the country, 53% of jobs now and into the next 10 years are going to be in this middle skills range, but only 43% of workers are trained at that level. So a lot of the policies that we're looking at are exactly what you were talking about, Andy. How are we making sure that the people that can be hired into your job pool and pipeline actually have the skills to get there? So it's consistently one of the issues where there's a lot of opportunity for Congress and the administration to act because, like Representative Graves was saying, there's this bipartisan energy behind skills and jobs training in a way that offers a lot of opportunity for actually moving something forward in DC right now when so many conversations are not trenched in that bipartisan support.
Yeah, gotcha. No, it is a positive. Well, as we promised, right, we got the tough stuff out of the way. Let's get to the innovations, right? And that's what's so exciting and why we're so excited to have certainly both of you from out of town too, right? And thank you for coming all this way. What are some of those innovative programs that you all have gotten started to address some of those challenges? Maybe to say a different way, what's the kind of innovations you can have that can help you sleep better at night, right?
So one of our many initiatives is taking the Department of Watershed Management, which is a regional water, wastewater, and stormwater utility, to a smart utility, and in every aspect. So this idea of the utility of the future, but making sure that we are using data to drive decisions, we are more efficiently managing our operation. But that takes looking at the skill set that moving to a smart utility will require. So we developed a framework for our workforce development program called StreamWorks. Our folks have been working with our colleagues in San Francisco to look at their Bay Work framework and what types of training opportunities and partnerships it requires to develop those skill sets. But in terms of internal and external pipeline development, one example that we just kicked off a program with our city's Department of Corrections to start building a pipeline in one way, using that relationship also with the state to hire pre-release inmates. These are nonviolent offenders. We took 9 individuals in this pilot program, and we put them in watershed trainee positions. So this is providing a pathway to employment for folks that would have challenges getting positions, as Andy said, those folks that you see need employment, but you don't have the vehicle to hire them. We also have a STEM internship program that is hired. We've hired over 100 college students. And then we're working on partnerships with local workforce development agencies, Atlanta Technical College offering CDL scholarships from the utility. And we're putting a focus on getting those employees internally that did not have the high school education required for certification, getting them training so that they can then apply for certification.
That's great. And Andy, same idea. I mean, how are you able, especially that third bucket, right? How are you thinking about the training and the skills to kind of tackle 1 and 2, if you will, right?
Thanks. Well, I think the first thing, it starts with what is the perspective of the utility. I think Keisha mentioned the Utility of the Future initiative. I think the old paradigm for clean water utilities was to stay under the radar, stay away from the public, stay away from the regulatory agencies, stay away from the press, stay away from those sorts of things, and just meet the permit. But the new paradigm for the Utility of the Future is to be an anchor institution, like Joe was saying earlier, that we are committed to the well-being of our public, the public that we serve. So we're not just trying to meet the permit, we're trying to be environmental champions, we're trying to be community service champions. So for example, Camden City has a combined sewer system like Atlanta, where when it rains, there's combined sewage flooding in the streets. We could solve that with a gray infrastructure project, but instead we look for gray and green infrastructure that not only captures stormwater, but provides a green amenity for the residents of Camden. But then the next step is, good begets good. We could hire a landscaping company to maintain those parks and green infrastructure, but instead we developed the Power Corps program, borrowing from our neighbors across the river in Philadelphia. We hire at-risk youth and train them to maintain the parks and rain gardens that we've constructed. So that in that way, these youth who are, like Keisha was describing in her program, these at-risk youth, 18 to 25 young men and women who might have some kind of a record, don't have a high school degree, a lot of barriers to employment. They work 8 hours a day. 4 to 5 hours a day they're actually working on the rain gardens. 3 to 4 hours a day they're getting life skills training and getting prepared for how to make a resume, how to go to an interview, and then job placement to the next job. We've hired a few of them, and then the new cohort rolls in. So the idea, I think, starts with the sense that you're not only, of course, our core mission is to protect the water, and meet the permit, but also the fact that we're a community service champion, and we want to look for ways to get jobs into the hands of people that need them the most in our community. On the other end of the spectrum, we also have a program that Joe mentioned, the Green Ambassador Program, where these are the best and the brightest in Camden. We hire high school students each summer, and we partner. We have an initiative called the Camden Collaborative Initiative, in which we partner with over 60 environmental nonprofits, some national, like the Trust for Public Land and the National Park Service, some local and regional, and they provide each day a new environmental experience for the 20 best and brightest Camden High School science students that were selected by the school district, underclassmen who will then each day one day they'll paddle with the Park Service, another day they'll plant a tree with the Tree Foundation, they'll come to our wastewater treatment plant for a day, 25 different environmental experiences, then they go back to their schools because they're underclassmen and are green ambassadors, and hopefully then go in for environmental science, have a leg up when they apply for colleges. So those are some of the things. But ultimately, I think that what's really needed is do something like Keisha said, and Joe said, Bayworks is a tremendous template to get a training program that will create a pipeline. I had to do it too. A pipeline to
legally required.
Right. To create a pipeline to convert the unemployed of our city into the replacement workers for our plants.
Yeah.
Gotcha. So, no, please, actually.
Well, I was just going to say that, when we have these discussions, we always focus externally on getting folks to come into the utility. Part of our challenge is keeping people too, retaining the workforce that we have, because many of the folks that are eligible to retire, they still have a lot of years ahead of them to work. And what they're doing is retiring and going to work for a consultant or going to work for another utility. And so what part of our program too was looking at what type of retention measures should we be putting in place. And that we found some good stuff in the Bayworks program. We don't have defined career paths. People come in, they're an operator, and they've been an operator for 30 years. And then they're ready to move on and do something else. Attracting a younger worker to our utilities, they want to see where they will be in 5 to 10 years. If you tell them they'll be in the same job for 30 years, then they're not going to want to come work for you. So we're having to define those career paths for folks and then figure out how to train the staff that we already have so that they are prepared to take another step and stay with us.
Right.
So that's part of it as well.
Well, I want to throw it your way, Kate, but really to all three of you, is how do we make sure that we bundle all these local innovations in a way so we know what's happening, right? And so from the workforce kind of side of the equation, if you will, how do you all hear about all these various innovations, right? Think about what those kind of common best practices to make almost like a permanent practice, right? And then vice versa. How do you make sure that anchor employers like utilities know the kind of scalable solutions that the workforce side is developing so it can create those less clogged pipeways to opportunity?
Well, maybe
That was my requirement too.
Oh, well, so I mean, the one thing that I can't stop thinking when both of Keisha and Andy are talking is the kind of investment, both of time and energy, that you all are talking about for building this pipeline and developing the next, which I can't even think of as a pun because it's workforce pipeline, is all we ever talk about, but takes a lot from you and your staff. I mean, I would be amazed, I'm sure, by even the number of people that you have internally working on this development, let alone the kind of partnerships that you're working with. And I think that's one thing that is difficult to express, is just how much it takes industry engagement and industry buy-in to be leading and starting these conversations. And for across industries, for folks that are an expert in wastewater management or in manufacturing a widget or whatever you're an expert in your industry, there's often a few people in your company that are working in HR or talent development or something like that. And so that's not what the whole company is ready to move and be mobilized around. Mm-hmm. And so that's really where the workforce development system can come in. And I think I would be interested in some of the funding that you all are using to support the corrections program that you're starting. I know with Baywork, the San Francisco Public Utility Commission is really leading that work, and Megan Scott is here from there and can speak much more eloquently about what they're doing than I can. But their funding, the initial funding when they went to do the analysis of what the labor market needs were, came from the workforce development system. And so each state's governor has this 15% funds that they get every year through the workforce development funding that they can spend on innovative practices. And California identified part of their public utility analysis as one of those priorities. They're continuing to be funded in some of their existing work now through additional funding from the workforce development system. And so there really is a role for the workforce development system to help to support what industry is driving towards. But it takes those partnerships at the local level, whether convened by industry, workforce system, education providers, to really ensure that local focus is embedded in what industry is doing and how the workforce and education systems are supporting them.
Yeah.
And Andy, you want to jump in, right?
Well, one thing I wanted to talk about is that, so there's 16,000 wastewater utilities in the country and over 60,000 drinking water utilities, and it's silly for Atlanta or Camden or San Francisco to develop 14,000 or 60,000 different solutions in a siloed way. And the thing about public sector entities is that we're glad to share information, and we often do. For example, the Power Corps program, like I mentioned, was Philadelphia's creation, and when we heard about it, but it was just haphazard because we're right across the river, they gave us their entire package and we duplicated it. So the thing that really needs to be done is to find out what is the state of play currently in the industry, collect it into one place, and knock when I see Adam Krancis here, has been working with us developing some sort of a compendium of workforce initiatives that we can then share with the entire utility, like a cookbook or playbook, so that the other utilities can say, oh, I didn't think of that. No one's doing everything, and no one can think of everything. And the idea is to get this sort of compendium out there so that at least utilities will see what kind of options are already being done. That's the first thing. Second thing, though, as Katie was saying, it's hard for us to do it by ourselves. So our Power Corps program, we do fund it, but yet we also are getting AmeriCorps funding. And that makes it possible. So if we were just to get a landscaping company to maintain our green spaces, our parks and rain gardens, it would be, and we had to pay the Power Corps out of our pocket, it would be 10 times more expensive because of all the life services and life skills training, that sort of thing. But the AmeriCorps grant makes it feasible. So it's a partnership, like Katie said. We're still spending a little bit more money, but on a triple bottom line basis, it's a tremendous win because these 180 young men and women are getting a training and an opportunity they wouldn't get otherwise. And you can't calculate not only the good that's done to each of them by having an opportunity and their families, but also the harm that they wouldn't do, because these are at-risk youth. And so I think the benefits are incalculable, but without the AmeriCorps program subsidizing and paying 50% of the funds, and we pay the other 50%, it'd be almost impossible for us to do it. So it definitely is a partnership that's needed, like Katie said.
That's a perfect segue to where I want to go is actually at the regional scale. So this is, Philly plus Camden plus, right, even down to Wilmington, right? We're geography nerds here, right? So for greater Atlanta, I mean, it's 20 plus counties now, right? So when we think about that kind of regional scale, from what all three of you have mentioned is clearly there's scalability here. What are the ingredients you all need to better collaborate at the regional level, right? Is it better communication cross-agency? Is it better communication across jurisdiction, right, but with common agency? What's both getting in the way, but when it works, whether it's on purely the workforce side or purely the water side, what's kind of causing elements to have success, right, on that kind of collaborative angle?
I think Katie hit the nail on the head. It takes intentionality, and in order for you to have that constant intentionality, you have to have dedicated resources. So we're using water and sewer funds to develop the curriculum for the training, the Watershed trainees. We've hired a full-time trainer. So that's great. We partnered with the Urban League to help us administer the program with Department of Corrections, and we're doing so many other things. But when the folks that we're using to move our workforce development initiative forward is my CAO and our Human Resources Director. Human Resources is largely focused on transactional stuff.
Right.
And my CAO has several other divisions that she's managing, from fleet to facilities and other administrative things. So one of the things that we know we have to do, is bring on full-time workforce development staff or team so that they can start working on the partnership opportunities that we have identified to get those solidified and in place. We know that other utilities in our region, like Gwinnett County and Cobb Marietta and others, have a similar focus. And as GMs, we've met in the region to talk about the challenges that we all have with the water workforce and retirement eligibility and those things. But it really takes having a coalesced group, similar to what we see in San Francisco. And EPA, I have to give Jim Horn a shout out. He's calling for a national convening led by EPA, and NACWA will be at the table as well. Those groups are helping us to with the thinking that we need around this issue while we're dealing with the day-to-day operations. It's so difficult to balance, but it is. I think we're at a point now where utilities know we need to do something. Ted Hennepin from Hampton Roads Sanitation District, he has a program there for training. So we don't need to reinvent the wheel. We just need to get in a room and figure out what is being done where, and as Andy said, put it all in a playbook that we can then start to access and implement. Because I think we've talked about the challenges enough, and we all know what they are.
Right. So is it okay to, I want the same question to you all, but it sounds like we need institutional architecture, though, at the regional scale, right?
Absolutely.
I mean, is that right?
Absolutely.
And the one thing I really want to stress is this is not an urban, we're in Camden and Atlanta, which are cities, but this is an urban and a rural problem. Basically, wherever there are people use water, so therefore there are water treatment plants, and they're often not in affluent communities. And so where people are, they drink water and use water, and water treatment plants need jobs, and people need workers rather than people need jobs. So this is an opportunity across the country, not just in cities, but also in rural areas. But Keisha said it very well, and Katie said it too. It's intentionality. If the utility goes through the old paradigm of just saying, well, I just have to fill this job or meet this task, and that's the only lens that they look through it, and they're not going to look at they're going to miss a lot of opportunities. But if clean water utilities look at themselves as community servant champions, anchor institutions in their cities, and say, how can I fill this role, but also do right by my community and deal with this, in the case of Camden, this 10.4% unemployment rate. Can we fill our water workforce needs, but also deal with the unemployment problems in the cities and towns and rural areas that we serve? That is a win-win opportunity. So intentionality is the first thing. If you're not looking in the right direction, you're not going to find the solution. Then I agree completely with what Keisha said, that this idea, and what you said as well, that this idea of an institutional architecture is needed. And I do credit Jim Horn from EPA and Adam and Nathan from NACWA taking the leadership and trying to develop this water workforce convening to at least get the water sector people in the same room. But we also need to get help from Department of Labor, I think, and also education. I think ideally, what we'd like to do in Bayworks is already set this template of having like a partnership with technical schools, vocational schools, community colleges to help train to eliminate this training gap, to train our residents and then help them become our replacement workers.
And I think what you said about it being urban and rural is really important too. I was just asking Joe before we came up to see if the stats were correct, but thinking about that it's rural and it's also about not just large employers, but it's about what small utilities need to develop their workforce as well. So it's the capacity hearing that you're thinking about bringing on dedicated workforce development experts that's incredible. For a utility that only has a few people, they probably don't have the capacity, and so partnering with the workforce development system is even more important. In rural areas where the community college is probably the only skills training institution in the area, then you've got a workforce development system that's covering an even broader area, so convening those partnerships is more difficult, and working through more necessity with a community college system who may or may not have the expertise and the capacity to run a cohort of 1 or 2 students for a small employer. It becomes important for those small employers to build scale, to come together, which then just requires more infrastructure at the regional level. One other thing that I will say, kind of in the workforce and skills development piece there that we've talked about a few times, is the idea of apprenticeship and developing the next pipeline of workers. And I think Milwaukee has developed over the past few years, now I'm going to say the wrong actual occupation, but let's see. Wastewater operator apprenticeship. So they developed this apprenticeship program 4 years ago, in part through partnerships funded through Department of Labor funding for apprenticeship initiative, and they haven't seen a ton of uptick in actually using and folks engaging in the apprenticeship program. And I think that's where these partnerships that they've been running with the Workforce Development Board and the Water Council in Milwaukee have been really useful in helping to build support for the idea of apprenticeship to train the pipeline, and also then giving the opportunity as they move forward and we see more federal investments in this area to build off of that foundation they've already built.
Right. So yeah, please.
Look, I'm sorry. I just want to add on to what Katie said, this idea of the fact that if it's hard for cities like Atlanta or cities like Camden to figure out a way to develop a program between community colleges and schools and ourselves, imagine with the rural and smaller capacity. That's why this need for a template so someone can just take 2 or 3 types of examples off the shelf and develop it themselves rather than having to come up with it 16,000 different times. It's impossible. And that's really the big gap nationwide, but also the opportunity. Because these water utilities are more similar than different. I mean, they may be sized differently, but the issues are the same. And so the key would be to make it easier to reduce that resource gap by developing a template that they could just use and work with their community schools and follow it instead of having to create it anew, afresh.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I mean, what I'm thinking about here too, right, on this rural bit, we see it in almost every industry, right? I mean, this is one of the challenges across the country, right? And in particular, someone gets that training in the rural area, and you're not trying to poach them, you're just posting a job, but they might want to live in Atlanta, right? Frankly, a lot of people want to live in Atlanta, right? Maybe not this time of year, but, better periods, right? As a Southerner, I know what's going on right there, right now. It's tough. But I'm saying folks all of a sudden they're coming there, right? So all the more important to have these kind of regional institutions that operate at scale, whether it's state level or, of course, for larger metropolitan areas like each of you are in, right? That is scale enough. But I want to kind of, before we kind of maybe go to the last federalist level here and go to federal, I want to kind of stop for a second and say, institutional architecture sounds great. Who's paying for it? I mean, where does the money come from on this?
Well,
this is a safe space. You can say whatever your dream about, right? It doesn't necessarily mean you are.
So I think we firmly believe that we should have some skin in the game, but there has to be some support from the federal government. There has been a decline in contribution to infrastructure investment, but we're talking about investing in people that are maintaining the billions of dollars of investments that we're already making on our ratepayers' dime. So I think there has to be, it has to be spread across, each level should contribute to making sure that people have the training required to access the jobs that are there. we're talking about, we right now have over 200 positions that are vacant. Wow. So those are opportunities that people that are underemployed or unemployed could access if they had the training and the skills for those jobs. That means that you would see other benefits in communities, reducing recidivism. You would see better pathways for children. You would see impact on economy. We talk about the impacts that our operations have on the economy. So I think that it should be a shared effort to build this infrastructure, or the architectural infrastructure for workforce development, and a shared responsibility to fund it.
I agree with Keisha completely. I mean, I think that, for example, we utilities have to have skin in the game. It's ultimately our responsibility to man our facilities, our women, resource our utilities, have people in there, and meet our obligations. And then also as community service anchors, we want to do that in the most equitable way possible. But so we have to pay for it, but we also do need help. And I want to echo what Congressman Graves said earlier. And what Keisha just said. The American Society of Civil Engineers gave our water infrastructure a D+ grade. Well, it's the same issue with water infrastructure. The people are part of that infrastructure, and so we have to, as Congressman Graves said, think proactively. In the case of construction, he quoted it. It's clear that an emergency repair is 3 to 5 times more expensive than a proactive planned maintenance. Similarly, with people, if you're putting people in a thoughtful way and doing it in a good way, the benefits of the community are incalculable, as Keisha said. And the way I see it too is that this template is a one-off initially. Creating that architecture and providing an example one time as opposed to people just and reducing that learning curve for everyone else is a relatively low investment that will have a tremendous ripple effect. And then you're looking at ongoing assistance to help maintain it. But I see it as a relatively light lift, sort of the analogy to preventative maintenance versus an emergency repair. That would have benefits that go far beyond the initial expenditure. And then, for special cases like the Power Corps program, where you're taking at-risk youth and not just hiring them, but also giving them life skills training and helping them with the issues that made them at-risk youth to begin with, that's where programs like AmeriCorps should assist. But the utility, as Keisha said, has to have skin in the game too.
Right.
I would add though that the power of the report that you released is connecting what we do to the larger sector. When we talk about the water sector, we're not just talking about public utilities. There's the private utilities. There are consultants and other contractors that need the same skill set. So I think if we're really taking a step back and kind of building that infrastructure, or that architecture rather, then we need to take a look at all of the opportunities that exist to engage every partner we can, and have all of those partnerships contribute to this effort. Because ultimately, if we pay to train them, eventually they move on to someplace else, and a lot of it is the private sector.
Right. So, well, Katie,
and they're already paying for training.
Absolutely. Well, yeah. The workforce side of the equation has so much experience with kind of figuring out how to bring this all together and pay for it, right? What can the broader water, but frankly even broader than that, the infrastructure sector, learn from other sectors of the economy that have figured out how to do this at scale?
Yeah, so one of the stats that I just find staggering is the idea that, so Georgetown Center on Education and Workforce said that if there is this large infrastructure package investment, then of $1 trillion, that could lead to 11 million new infrastructure jobs, and that just only adds to some of the crisis that you all are talking about with the aging of the workforce, and so that when you're faced with that kind of crisis of how you're developing these partnerships become even more crucial. And Georgia has actually been a leader in figuring out how to support some of these partnerships, but limited funding makes it, I don't actually think that it's expanded into the water industry, but Georgia uses part of their workforce development funds for what they call the High Demand Career Initiative, which supports partnerships across the state, bringing folks together, doing the labor market analysis, and that's something that a number of states are using their state funds to help support. But it's a required activity for the workforce development system, so your local workforce centers and boards are required to be supporting these partnerships under the Workforce Innovation Opportunity Act. which, similar to WRDA, also had huge bipartisan support, but has yet to see funding levels to help support that bipartisan vision. So you mentioned the reduction in infrastructure investment. We've seen a 40% cut in the investment in our workforce development system since 2001. So as businesses are putting your own skin in the game, there's less kind of investment coming from the government to help support bringing all the different partners together. So Georgia has done some of that. We've been working with Representative Ferguson from Georgia and Representative Bonamici from Oregon on a bill called Partners Act, which would help fund additional partnerships really based on what Georgia has been doing. But it's that additional funding to help support that really wonky kind of weird partnership function that's difficult to communicate that can be so crucial from what it sounds like you all are talking about.
Yeah. And you have to go on a scavenger hunt to find those opportunities.
Exactly.
You know, we heard about the Quick Start program that in Georgia as well, which an airline used to help set up a training program for a specialized mechanic, and then they became an exporter worldwide for this specialized mechanic using that program. They basically filled a gap that they have for a specialized worker, but they used that program. We knew nothing about it. As you said, I'm an engineer. I'm not an HR practitioner, so or have been in workforce development. So when you run a utility and you're faced with these issues, you've got to get up to speed on how to handle the workforce, but you've also got to get up to speed on all the opportunities that exist out there. And it literally is like a scavenger hunt to find funding and programs and partnerships and put it all together so that you can meet the needs of your utility. And it shouldn't be that way.
Right.
I agree with Keisha 100% on that because, and that's what I was saying earlier about having the information in one place. That's why working with NACWA and EPA to try to bring all that information into one roof. It shouldn't be a scavenger hunt. I mean, our program we happen to be right across the river from Philadelphia. That's the only reason we heard about it. And so the idea is that there should be some sort of compendium of these successful practices so that people and utilities know about it, so they can say, all right, I want to solve this problem. So first, like Keisha said, intentionality, and then second, a one-stop shop of where to go to find the solutions, and hopefully resources and funding to help implement them.
Which ironically is what the workforce development centers are actually called, is one stop. So.
Well, look, we had a congressman here, right? I think it's a default for so many of us when we watch Washington federal issues to just think about Congress, right? And it's great, right? We need legislation moving. We need authorizations that then allow our agencies to do the work they want to do. I want to stay on the agency tip for a second, right? So you brought up, I love this, the metaphor of a scavenger hunt. Trust, we feel that way when we do our own research, right? So we know the feeling. What would you like to see from the agencies that could help you all do your work better, right? So whether it's creating a compendium of information, right? Is it boosting technical support, right? What can they offer you at that natural scale when you're at the federal level, right? That can help both these regional actions as well as within utilities themselves.
I have like three asks. One would be this compendium. The second would be the state revolving fund is so amazing. I mean, we've used it in New Jersey and gotten such great assistance from EPA and our state agency. But if they could, without reducing the total fund, maybe add like a 5% kicker. Our friend Adele Hogginskill from Los Angeles had this idea. Add like a 5% or X percent, for each infrastructure grant for training in the low interest loan. We still have to pay the loan back, right, but it would be affordable. So let's say you have a $50 million project, add 3% in there for training to operate the and then the infrastructure, the utility is supposed to pay the loan back, but then you have that opportunity. And then I think the third thing is some sort of collaboration of EPA, labor, and education together, because all three partners are needed to make this work. That would be, so rather than having to go over those jurisdictional boundaries, but have them all in the same room somehow.
Yeah. I would say pretty much ditto. I don't think it should be left to us to figure out who should take the lead at the federal level on making sure this happens. I think the three partners there that Andy talked about really need to work together to figure out who's the natural lead, but it is going to take working across those agencies and not being siloed to make sure that this happens. We have a group that we work with, both Andy and I and Ted, who's here, which we call the Water Agency Leaders Alliance. Is 17 utilities from across the country that banded together to work on water sector equity issues, workforce development being one of them. So if we can work across the country through conference calls and other things to make sure that this issue is top of mind for folks, I think that the meeting that EPA is calling will help. But there really needs to be kind of a focused discussion among them to figure out what can each of those agencies put in this equation that will help the country, all of the utilities here, be able to deal with this issue a bit better.
Right, absolutely. And we are huge, not just, we think the summit's a great idea too, we're huge supporters of summits, but the problem is the summit ends, right? And how do you create the longevity there too? And we know the federal agencies have a ton of interest in more programming here too, right? Katie, let's close with you, at least for my questions, because I can't wait to turn to the audience. I mean, what are the other best practices that the kind of broader workforce development community is looking for from federal agencies to help them do their job across the country better?
Yeah, I think the interagency collaboration is certainly at the foundation of it. It's interesting that you mentioned the 5% set aside. So and currently under the federal highway bill, states can use, it's no longer limited, it used to be limited to 0.5% of their federal highway funds to help support workforce development. This is something that only a few states have actually engaged in and used. But that model is something that could really translate into other industries. Not to go back to Congress, I know we're talking agencies, but we're working on we've been working on a bill, been introduced in both the Senate and the House on a bipartisan basis that would set aside under that larger infrastructure package a portion of funding based on that same model for workforce development. Senator Booker and Senator Capito have a bill in WRDA that would help support grants for workforce development. And so I think it's really that appreciation and the work with DOL and ED to ensure that when we're talking about investments in doing this kind of infrastructure work, that we're paying attention to the fact that there's got to be folks trained to do the work.
Mm-hmm.
Right, absolutely. I've had the best job because I get to listen to everyone right up close and ask them questions. So we've been able to reserve, I think, even more time than we had for the congressman here to ask some questions, right? So again, let's take questions to the crowd. And again, all we ask, just say who you are and end your statements with a question mark.
I'm Jim Horn. I'm the guy that these two
You're right.
talked about. I just want to make clear that we are partnering with 3 or 4 other national associations to hold this convening later this year. So we want to make it as action-oriented as we possibly can. And this is not a convening just of utilities necessarily. It all sounds great. It's going to be interesting to see if we can pull it off together, but it is a joint exercise. The one thing that Andy said that I want to kind of push back a little bit on is maybe it's just the use of the word template. I'm not sure there is a template. I think there is a lot of space there, Andy, to create, and I don't want to say even a roadmap, but basically sort of laying out sort of the basic elements of what a water workforce strategy might be at the utility level, just the basic elements, and then focusing in on providing as much information as you can about practices in that particular part of the strategy that are taking place now. We've had a lot of success collaborating with the national associations on something sort of about how you manage your utility as a whole. I wonder what you thought of that idea. I think that could complement sort of the practices compendium that NACWA is working on, and we will be happy to work with them as well. But I wonder what you thought of that basic idea.
Well, yeah, I use template as a sort of a catch-all, but really it's a component of several things in the toolbox. I think maybe a compendium of what's already been done, a roadmap on how to do it yourself, using those as examples, and then lastly, probably maybe more of a template would be some sort of national training program for wastewater operators, wastewater repairs, rather than having the community college have to come up with and work with the utilities to come up with their own curriculum, have it already done. That may be more of a template. So it's probably a compendium of existing practices, a roadmap on how to do it, and then an educational template for the community schools to train the students.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I would agree, and I think Andy used the word playbook as well, because I think it's broad, but there does need to be some templating, especially for small utilities that don't have the resources to do the research on how to pull specific programs together. Case in point, it took us a year and some change to pull the program that we have with Department of Corrections and the State of Georgia Department of Corrections together. There were some things that needed to be put in place first before they could actually have a program. The city's Department of Corrections had to be certified as a pre-release center with certain rules in place, and then we had to set up how are these employees are going to be getting paid. What are we going to do with the pay while they are technically still incarcerated? So there are those things that I think you can lay out so that someone doesn't have to take a year to put a program together. But if that is a program from the playbook that will work for that particular community or utility or whatever it is, then these are the things that you need to have and put in place and make sure your law department reviews. Type of deal. Yeah.
Let's go right here, this gentleman.
Good afternoon, or good morning rather. Thank you for your time and your appearance on this panel. My name is Amir Wright. I'm a third-year student at the University of California, Berkeley. So this SFPUC in Bayworks hits very close to home for me, living right in the Bay Area. So my question is really about students and how can we educate the upcoming generation on, that these jobs are available and that the water workforce is somewhere, that they can find a career, because students don't, come up and say, I want to be a water administrator when I grow up. So how can we, make sure that they're
That's for
aware
sure.
of these opportunities? Thank you.
I certainly didn't. This is the furthest thing. I wanted to be an interior designer. My mother said no, go into engineering. So one of the initiatives that we have is revamping our K through 12 program, and San Francisco PUC has a program as well. They also have a very extensive internship program, and they actually require contractors and vendors that are doing work for them to participate in some ways in their internship program. A lot of that falls to us. We have to do a better job at recruiting, and what we found, and the reason why we're revamping our K through 12 program, is that the information about the opportunities that exist in water should start in elementary school. So we're not just targeting high school students for those students that we know will not go on to college, and we estimate about 75% of high school students don't actually go to college. They look for other, especially now, they're looking for other avenues besides going to a four-year school. They may go to technical college. So we're trying to work with the school system so that we can infuse some of the information that we have in the curriculum, but also making sure that we identify the career days at these schools so that we can participate. So a lot of students or a lot of schools will ask students to bring your parent to talk about the work they do. We want to be a parent and go ourselves on career days, especially at the elementary and middle school level. And certainly with high schools, there's an opportunity for police and fire. A lot of recruits come directly from high school. We also want to be an employer of choice for high school students. And then college level, we have a number of colleges and universities in the Atlanta area, Georgia Tech. We get some students, Georgia State University. We've also got to do a better job at making sure that we identify the opportunities to engage those students in college. This year we did a bit better job. We got over 100 students in our internship program. We changed our internship program to be completely STEM focused and getting that information out to the colleges and universities. Instead of starting to recruit applicants in February, March, April, we started in September to give students an opportunity, ample opportunity to really look at and apply for our internships.
And one of the things I think, the partnerships with the K-12 and post-secondary system are so important. One of the other things, not to keep going back to the same example, but that Baywork does is they've worked with the instructors and the educators and brought them in for programs to help train them in the industry, bring them up to some of the standards that the industry is working with to help engage them to be good ambassadors back to students. And so which another federal program, Perkins Career and Technical Education, can help support some of that continuing education for instructors and for teachers to help make sure that the whole robust education and workforce system is working to support where industry actually is.
I just want to say that, first of all, I just have to say that, you mentioned SFPUC and being in the Bay Area. I mean, San Francisco is really and Megan Scott is here. I just want to thank them. Keisha mentioned the Water Agency Leaders Alliance. I mean, really founded very much by San Francisco and led by San Francisco. They are the most progressive water utility. There are a lot of them, but they're really our spiritual leaders in dealing with these water equity issues. And so we look to them for support and guidance. So, and Bayworks is just one example, and there's other utilities in the Bay Area that work on that. But second thing is that I agree very much with Keisha and Katie said it's important, especially to get not just water workforce opportunities, but also we want to create the environmentalists of the future. We want to, also the water ratepayers of the future, that they'll support, rate increases for, if necessary, to bring that D+ infrastructure grade back up. So it's important for people to understand the importance of water in their lives, and also as an opportunity potentially for careers. And so we're doing with our Green Ambassador program in our high schools, but it definitely it's an opportunity that needs to be followed up even more.
Okay, I just negotiated to squeeze one more question in, so try to be brief, and I will ask the great panelists to be brief too. Let's go right up here. Yeah.
Victoria Johnson, representing Louisville MSD. Keisha, my question is for you. So wanted to commend you on your reentry program that you have in Atlanta. 2 questions for you. Can you talk a bit about your short-term and long-term goals for that program? I understand it's a pilot program. And secondly, as you talk about a potential playbook as things move forward, have you had other utilities like Louisville MSD and others around the country consult with you about your program to try to duplicate that in other cities?
Yes, Louisville MSD, which this summer they will be hosting a 5 cities conference to talk about the launch of a similar initiative. So our good friend Tony Parrott there, who works with us. And I'm glad we called it a pilot program because we have had some challenges. The number one challenge is the life skills part. The employees were doing, or the trainees were doing a great job at the training, in the classroom training. They're training to get certified. And they're also doing the hands-on fixing hydrants and meter leaks and other things. But the life skills part and reverting back to old behaviors was a challenge for 3 of the individuals. So they were actually pulled from the program. And we believe the 6 remaining trainees will be successful in the program. But one of the challenges of this is when they leave work, they're going back to the institution. And so they come out of their watershed uniform and they put back on their jumpsuit. And so they're not completely out of that mindset. We targeted for the start of the program fathers, so that would give them the added incentive of really staying on the right track. But that is going to be, that I would say is a challenge that has to be monitored. There are certain things that they cannot do, like take cell phones and meet with folks while they're at work. And so I think they were very clear about the rules, but we don't have people that are working with them every day that are necessarily monitoring. We did not want to have someone from the jail do ride-alongs with them, but they are able to assess and figure out, some things that go on. And so that's kind of the downside, but I would say we have another 10 individuals that are ready, and we're going to keep. This has been largely successful. The 6 that are there remaining, they're working extremely hard to turn around, and we're so proud of them.
That's a great way to close. I've got two thanks, so hold your seats for 1 second. First, of course, join me in thanking the panel for coming all this way and for your great conversation. I just also want to really quickly thank Karen Slacheka, who's standing over there, who always puts on events. And thanks to all of you, not just for coming today. A lot of you in the audience are really helpful to Joe and myself, the rest of our team in this process. So thank you for helping to make the work possible, actually. So thanks. Have a great day.
Thank you.
Thanks for watching. Be sure to like and subscribe for more videos from Brookings.